Hello, and welcome to a Pokemon XD Gala Darkness video, where today I'm going to be using Jynx and Mr. Mime to beat the game. And before even looking into this at all, I know for a fact these two together are going to do extremely well. Psychic is an extremely good type in this game, being great both offensively and defensively, and while Jynx does have the Ice type, making it a little worse defensively, offensively it is going to be a powerhouse, hitting just about every single type in the game for at least neutral damage, with the only real exception to that being the Steel type, which there's not too many of. So with that, let's go ahead and get right into it. Starting with Jynx, it has 65 HP, 50 attack, 35 defense, 115 special attack, 95 special defense, and 95 speed, making it a very fast special attacker with honestly terrible physical stats, but honestly that shouldn't really matter too much as long as I'm able to take down threats in a single hit. Moving on to its move pool, and it gets access to mostly normal and ice type moves through level up, though it does get Lick at the beginning, which could come in handy. But it's really the TMs and tutor moves where it gets a lot of its type variety, with moves like Water Pulse and Brick Break, and surprisingly it doesn't get Psychic through level up, so it will need to rely on that TM, but despite this I do think that it's going to be extremely powerful. Now moving on to Mr. Mime, it has 40 HP, 45 attack, 65 defense, 100 special attack, 120 special defense, and 90 speed, making it very similar to Jynx in that it's a fast special attacker, but it does trade a bit of its offense for a little bit more defense and special defense, but it also comes at the cost of its HP stat, making it noticeably more frail than Jynx. And now moving on to the move pool, and it is specifically Psychic and normal type moves through level up, with a lot of those being setup and status moves, and just like Jynx, it's not until we move over to the TMs that we see a lot more type coverage, with many of the same moves that Jynx could get, but notably it gets access to electric type moves like Thunderbolt and Thunder, which might end up coming in handy this run. Now moving on to our Jynx in particular, it has a serious nature, so it is ready for this challenge. Unfortunately, it's a neutral nature, so it doesn't really gain anything. It gets access to the Oblivious ability, which prevents attraction, and that might actually be useful for a couple fights, and by level 10 it gets Pound, Powder Snow, Lick, and Lovely Kiss. So with that, let's go and move over to Mr. Mime, who has a quirky nature, which is also a neutral nature, which I guess is still fine for Mr. Mime. It gets access to the Soundproof ability, which makes it so any sound moves don't actually work, such as Screech or Growl, and by level 10 it gets Barrier, Confusion, and Substitute. So with that, let's go ahead and go into the game, and the first thing we need to do is fight the old man, because obviously these two have really no problem getting through the early game, with the only real exception possibly being to him, because Abra does have Fire Punch, and if it uses it into Jynx, it will do a decent amount of damage, though it does just go down in a single hit. Now I've used Jynx a few times in these challenge videos, and one thing I've never noticed is that whenever she gets hit, the face pops off of her body. And I'm pretty sure that's a carryover from the Pokemon Stadium games, like a lot of animations in this game, but I'm pretty sure they changed some of Jynx's animations, which we'll see later. But anyway, at level 13, Mr. Mime gets the move Meditate, and then I go into the battle against the Power Rangers, where today I decide to fight Green because I have Powdered Snow, dealing super effective damage to all of his Pokemon, and Mr. Mime can finish off the Pokemon that don't quite go down with Confusion. So with that, let's go and move on to just a little bit of rambling. If you are enjoying this video so far, consider liking, and if you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Now going back to what I was talking about before, I'm almost certain that whenever Jynx fainted in the old Stadium games, she would like disappear underneath her giant head of hair. So unlike a lot of the first generation Pokemon, there's actually a little bit of extra work done here to make her a little different. Anyway, with that, we're just about finished with the battle against Green, and we move into the Cypher base, where we run into Loveren as she leads with a Love Disc and a Beautifly, and right away I go for Powder Snow and Barrier to bolster Mr. Mime's defenses, so that some of the Pokemon later on won't just take him down in a single hit, and Powder Snow takes Beautifly down below half health, so another one of them is able to take it down, and then at level 21, Mr. Mime gets the move Light Screen, which I decide to teach over Meditate, and then and also Reflect, which I decide to teach over Barrier, and then she sends out her Roselia, which will definitely go down to a single Confusion, or maybe not. I'm actually a bit surprised it survived there, but it doesn't really matter too much because Powder Snow comes out, finishes it off, and then at level 21, Jynx wants to learn the move Double Slap, which I decide not to teach, and then she sends out her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Delcatty. Confusion does a decent amount of damage to it, and so I go for another one, and then I decide to go for Lovely Kiss, which would have confused it, but I feel like Powder Snow might have been able to just finish it off that turn. Anyway, it's able to hit a Shadow Rush, go for Pound into Love Disc, and a Confusion to finish off the Delcatty, which just leaves the poor little Love Disc behind. And with a Pound and a Confusion, it gets taken down, and we beat Loverain on the first attempt. Now, of course, you can't have a perfect duo without the obligatory Mirror B showing up. How is it going, Mirror B? How's your day? Fantastic as always. Anyway, at level 25, Mr. Mime gets the move Encore, which I decide to teach over Substitute. At the top of the ONBS building, I pick up the Ralts for the Twisted Spoon item, raising all Psychic type damage by 10%. And then I go to the Railgun Tower to go pick up my two favorite TMs, Hidden Power and Protect. And for the moment, I'm just going to teach it to Jynx, who got Hidden Power Rock at 55 base power, but later on I'll probably teach it to Mr. Mime because it gets Fire at 68 base power, giving it an excellent coverage option. But with that, we now leave the Railgun Tower, and it's time to go and pick up this Swinub with the Never Melt Ice item, raising all Ice type damage by 10%. And then at level 29, Mr. Mime gets Psybeam, which I teach over Confusion, and then I teach Jynx Ice Beam over Ice Punch. So with that, we now go into the battle against Snaddle. He lives with Quagsire and Matang, and right away I go for Ice Beam into the Quagsire, taking it down in a single hit. That then brings out his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Lunatone, and I go for Psybeam into it because I didn't expect Quagsire to go down in a single hit. I go for another Ice Beam, which takes down the Lunatone, and then out comes Castform. Psybeam goes into it, taking it down below half. Shockwave, not really doing that much to Mr. Mime. Go for Ice Beam to finish off the Castform, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Matang. I go for Psybeam into the Lantern, dealing almost half, and I go for another Psybeam to hopefully finish it off. Ice Beam does almost half do Matang as well. Lantern survives on just a sliver, and then Matang goes for Metal Claw. Luckily it wasn't into Jynx, so it's able to fire off another Ice Beam, nearly taking it down. Psybeam does take down the Lantern, and then unfortunately Matang does take down Jynx. And like I was saying before, Jynx doesn't disappear underneath the hair anymore, she just goes away as one full Pokemon. Anyway, with that, there's no way that Matang outspeeds, so I'm able to take it down with Psybeam, and we move on. In the Snag'em base, I'm able to pick up the Psychic team, which I teach to Jynx, and then we go into the battle against Gonzap. He leads with Electrode and a Nuzleaf, and on the first turn, the Nuzleaf is going to go for Fake Out, and despite having a decent level advantage, unfortunately Jynx wasn't able to outspeed Electrode, though luckily it does just miss the Sonic Boom and goes down to a single Ice Beam. Then out comes Vileplume, which goes down to a single Psychic, and then he sends out Whiscash, and because Nuzleaf just used the move Fake Out, I can use Encore to make it continuously use a move that doesn't work past the first turn that it's sent out. So I'm able to freely take down the Whiscash, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is Skarmory. And I'm just now realizing I forgot to record myself teaching Mr. Mime Hidden Power. But anyway, Skarmory goes down to a single Ice Beam, and Hidden Power takes down the Nuzleaf in a single hit. So with that, we beat Gonzap, and now we move on. In the Cypher Pyramid, I get the TM for Thunderbolt, which I teach to Mr. Mime over Encore, and then I go into the battle against Gorgon. He leads with a Lairon and a Celio, and right away I go for Thunderbolt into the Celio. And Hidden Power, which Hidden Power takes it down to half, and Thunderbolt finishes it off, and then he sends out his Slowking. And because I don't want Lairon using Earthquake, I go ahead and target it with Ice Beam, which it unfortunately survives with just a little bit of HP, and Thunderbolt doesn't quite take down the Slowking. It goes for Iron Tail, taking Jynx down from nearly full health, which is honestly a bit surprising. I go for Thunderbolt to take down the Slowking, and then he sends out Ursaring. I decide to go for Psybeam into it, which unfortunately only does a little over half, so it's able to hit a Slash, taking me down to half, and Iron Tail finishes me off. And this was a battle I really wasn't expecting to lose to, but I think just the general frailty of these two are starting to catch up with them as we get further and further into the run. Anyway, going back into the battle once again, it's the exact same start as before, then out comes the Slowking, but this time I'm actually going to focus a bit more on taking down Lairon. Ice Beam still doesn't take it down, and Psybeam finishes off, and then he sends out the Ursaring once again. Unfortunately, my change in tactics doesn't go unpunished because immediately Mr. Mime gets confused by Slowking's Water Pulse. I go for Ice Beam into the Slowking, not really doing that much damage, and Mr. Mime hits itself, allowing it to use Earthquake, which actually doesn't deal as much damage as I thought it would. Go for Ice Beam into the Ursaring, taking it down in a single hit, and then finally at level 45, Mr. Mime gets the move Psychic, which I teach over Psybeam, and then out comes his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Primeape, and Mr. Mime is able to get through and use Thunderbolt to take down the Slowking, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Hypno. I go for Thunderbolt into the Hypno and Psychic to take down the Primeape in a single hit. And Mr. Mime snaps out of confusion, and Thunderbolt really doesn't do that much damage, but it also doesn't do much damage in return. I go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, and Ice Beam does an incredible amount of damage to it, freezes it, and Thunderbolt finishes it off. So with that, we beat Gorgon, and now we're moving on to the last area of the game, where these two are doing incredibly well, with only very minor time loss and only having one loss so far to Gorgon. So with that, we move on to the battle against Laverina. She leads with a Gardevoir and a Gorbis this time, and I go for Ice Beam into the Gardevoir. Not quite enough to take it down, but Thunderbolt does take down Gorbis in a single hit, and then out comes Roselia. Gardevoir goes for Attract, but that doesn't really matter because I go for Powder Snow, which takes down the Gardevoir and deals quite a bit of damage to Roselia. Then out comes Farfetch'd, her first Shadow Pokemon that immediately gets taken down by Thunderbolt, and then out comes her final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Altaria. And it is 4 times weak to Ice, so it's going to go down right away, and that'll just leave the Roselia. But strangely enough, I went for Powder Snow. Maybe it was a misclick, I'm not exactly sure, but Thunderbolt does take down Altaria, and we beat her on the first attempt. Now moving on to the top of the volcano, and we run into Snaddle once again, who leads with a Metang and a Quagsire, and I go for Ice Beam right away, taking down Quagsire, which then sends out his Scizor. I decide to go for Hidden Power into Metang. Unfortunately, it doesn't quite go down, so it's able to hit a pretty strong Metal Claw into Jynx. I go for Ice Beam to finish off the Metang, and then he sends out his first Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Solrock. And I go for Hidden Power into Scizor to take it down, bringing out Castform. And now I decide to go for Psychic to take down the Castform, and Ice Beam, which takes down Solrock in a single hit, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Starmie. Now, maybe in hindsight, I should have gone for Thunderbolt to take down the Starmie right away, but it doesn't really matter too much because Ice Beam does a decent chunk to it. It's able to use a Shadow Break, not enough to finish off Jynx, and Thunderbolt takes it down. So now moving on to the next fight against Ardos, he leads with a Shadow Swallow and Alakazam, and I know for a fact Jynx is going to be faster than Swallow, so I go for Ice Beam to take it down right away, and then he sends out Kingdra. Mr. Mime goes for Thunderbolt into the Alakazam, which doesn't quite take it down in a single hit, though it does put it fairly low. I don't get frozen. Go for the Ice Beam into the Kingdra, nearly taking it down in a single hit. Thunderbolt finishes off the Alakazam with a crit, and then he sends out Heracross. Kingdra goes for Double Edge, dealing almost half of Mr. Mime's health, but it takes itself down in the process, and then he sends out his next Shadow Pokemon, a Shadow Electabuzz. I go for Ice Beam, which doesn't quite take it down in a single hit, but it does freeze it. I go for Psychic to take down Heracross, and then he sends out his final Pokemon, which is a Shadow Snorlax. The Lucky Freeze was honestly very helpful. Go for another Ice Beam to finish it off, just so it doesn't wake up, and go for Shadow Mist, and I go ahead and set up Reflect. That way the Snorlax won't be dealing nearly as much damage when it eventually hits. The first Psychic gets a special defense drop, and Snorlax nearly gets taken down by the second, but it's able to attack through, and takes Mr. Mime down to extremely low red. But another Psychic takes it down, and we beat Ardos on the first attempt. Now moving on to Gorgon, and he leads with an Ursaring and a Slowking, and right away I double into the Slowking because the Ursaring does protect, and so I'm able to take it down on the first turn, and then he sends out Aggron. Now, given how the previous fight against Gorgon went, I should probably take down the Aggron, but I did not learn my lesson, and left it alive by it not going down to Thunderbolt, and luckily it spares Jynx by attacking Mr. Mime. I go for Psychic, dealing quite a bit of damage to Walrein, and a Thunderbolt finishes it off, and then he sends out his next Pokemon, a Shadow Poliwrath. Now, with it being part fighting, it is weak to Psychic, so I can take it down pretty easily. Go for Ice Beam to take down the Aggron, which brings out his final Pokemon, a Shadow Mr. Mime. Hello there, other Mr. Mime. Psychic does take down Poliwrath in a single hit before it's able to set up Shadow Sky, and all that's left is this Mr. Mime that Ice Beam takes down in a single hit. Goodbye, other Mr. Mime. Anyway, now moving on to the battle against Eldis, he leads with a Shadow Manectric and Ninjask, and right away I want to get rid of the Manectric, so I go for Ice Beam into it, taking it down in a single hit, and then out comes this next Pokemon, a Shadow Salamence. And considering how much damage Ninjask did with a single Silver Wind, it was very wise of me to go for a Reflect. Unfortunately, it doesn't really pay off because it gets a critical hit taking down Jynx in a single hit, and it also gets an Omni Boost, so it's able to survive my Hidden Power Fire, and unfortunately I go down fairly quickly. However, that was very much a fluke of a first attempt, so I go back in once again, and instead the Jynx gets hit by the Silver One this time, taking it down to half right away. Out comes the Salamence once again, and I set up Reflect just as before. As long as Ninjask doesn't get a crit, I'll be able to survive anything it does now. Go for Ice Beam, taking down the Salamence in a single hit, and then out comes Flygon. And because that Ninjask is such a nuisance, I'm going to take it down right away as well, bringing out his next Pokemon, which is a Shadow Marowak. Now, maybe that wasn't the best idea because Marowak is actually a bit threatening, and because I had Jynx take down Flygon, I'm going to have to rely on Mr. Mime to take it down, and if it doesn't, I'm very likely to get taken down myself. Luckily, it does miss, so I actually don't have to pay for my negligence there. And so I go for Thunderbolt, taking Lapras down very low, and it's able to set up Shadow Sky, but at this point I outspeed and finish it off with a Psychic. So with that, we beat Eldest on the second attempt, and now moving on to the big box legendary Shadow Lugia. And right away, I'm going to go for Ice Beam and Thunderbolt, which Ice Beam does a considerable amount of damage to it. Unfortunately, it does outspeed Mr. Mime, dealing a ton of damage to it in return. But now with the Shadow Lugia defeated, we now move on to the final battle against Gravel. He leads with a Shadow Rhydon and Moltres, and right away, Ice Beam is able to take down Moltres in a single hit, and then out comes Executor. I go for Thunderbolt into the Moltres, which doesn't quite get the KO, and Mr. Mime is taken down. I go for Ice Beam to take down the Executor, which then sends out his next Pokemon, a Shadow Tauros. And then Moltres goes for another Shadow Fire, which burns Jynx. So unfortunately, I am set on a timer now. I'm able to take down the Tauros, and then out comes Articuno. And Moltres finishes off Jynx with another Shadow Fire. So seeing as this is very much doable, I decide to go ahead and use up all my rare candies now, giving 3 levels to both Jynx and Mr. Mime, and with those 3 levels, I should be able to take down the Moltres now, so I go for Thunderbolt, and it survives on just about the same amount of HP, so I must have just gotten a terrible range. But in any case, I go for Ice Beam, taking down Executor, bringing out the Tauros once again, and then I finish off the Moltres with another Thunderbolt, which brings out his next legendary bird, Articuno. Now with Mr. Mime on the field, I can go for Thunderbolt and Ice Beam, taking it down in a single turn, which then just leaves his final Pokemon, a Shadow Zapdos, which may potentially be able to outspeed Mr. Mime. So I really hope a single Ice Beam is able to take it down. And I go for Psychic into the Tauros, which Zapdos does go down to a single Ice Beam, and Psychic doesn't quite take down the Tauros, but it just wastes a turn going for Shadow Hold before going down to Ice Beam. So with that, Jynx and Mr. Mime have finished the game, but how well did they do? They beat the game at a time of 7 hours, 3 minutes, and 26 seconds, with Mr. Mime and Jynx being level 59, and they had 3 feints throughout the game, 3 of those to bosses, and 0 to random trainers. So it's as I expected at the beginning. These two are an incredibly powerful duo, being able to take on just about every single threat in the game with little to no issue. And all 3 losses that they did get can all be attributed to things outside of their control. The first to Gorgon, which was my own incompetence. The second was, of course, to bad luck against Eldest. And then the third was because Mr. Mime came in heavily damaged against Greyball. So with that, I really don't have any negatives to say. These Pokemon are just extremely powerful with no real issues throughout the game. So I guess I'll just go over the extreme positives. Like I said at the beginning, Psychic and Ice both great offensive types, and Psychic is a pretty good defensive type in this game. Ice not so much, but it definitely makes up for it in its offensive power. Mr. Mime having access to screens really allows these two to survive incoming attacks that they probably wouldn't be able to normally, and these Pokemon are both very fast, so they're able to outspeed a lot of the threats that would otherwise probably give them a lot of issue. If there was anything I would nitpick, it's just that the move pools themselves are a little lacking in type diversity, but the thing is that you get access to so many TM and tutor moves of different types that it really doesn't even end up mattering. And even though Mr. Mime did get a great hidden power fire, I doubt it really made that much of a difference, except for maybe against Snattle's Scizor. Though I'm almost certain it would have gone down had I just decided to double into it. And it's not like Soul Rock setting up Shadow Sky would have mattered all that much. But anyway, it should come as no surprise that they find themselves in the SS tier, only being a little behind their fellow Gen 1 duo of Magmar and Electabuzz, and also slightly slower than Groudon. But with that, if you did enjoy this video, consider liking and subscribing. If you have any Pokemon suggestions, please put them down below. Thank you so much for watching, and bye!